For decades, southern Philippines was plagued by violence as Muslim separatists fought for independence.
Mass killings, massacres, massive displacement of peoples in Mindanao.
Then, 10 years ago, a historic peace agreement was inked between the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the government.
Of course, during the signing, there was this jubilation of real relief and hope.
But peace is fragile. With 1 year left to fulfill the terms of the agreement, will it fall apart before the finish line?
Kung hindi maglabas yung mga promises ng government, yung sa mga na-decom, hindi din basta-basta nag-decom yung mga hindi pa na-decom.
Every time there are elections or rivalries related to elections, families or parties would engage in violence to the extent of killing their opponent.
This is Basilan, some 1,400 kilometers south of Philippines' capital, Manila. It is surrounded by the pristine turquoise waters of the Sulu Sea. But this tranquility was shattered in November 2022. A fight broke out between the Philippines Army and members of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF. It started when MILF members were asked to leave their homes by the authorities. Huram Malanga was one of them.
Yung nangyari, kami MILF lang, ma'am. Tapos, magsabi yung mga LGU, may tao yung masama doon sa amin. Tapos, pinadeposition namin kami sa ibang lugar naman. Okay na lang. Kasi yung lahat yung mga doon, yung mga bahay namin, balik na kami sa bahay. Yun na. Yun painte kapag neruksundaluhin.
Each side blamed the other for firing first. In the end, 3 soldiers and 4 MILF fighters were killed. This was the first major clash between the MILF and the authorities since 2015, with so many fatalities. The event was unusual because 10 years ago, the MILF had signed a peace agreement with the Philippine government. So why did this episode of violence break out?
That's precisely our question, because there are supposedly ceasefire mechanisms and monitoring teams that are actually put to task to effect a situation where clashes should be avoided.
To understand the story of war and peace is to go back centuries into the turbulent history of southern Philippines, in particular the Mindanao and Sulu regions.
Everybody knows that Mindanao and Sulu had never been part of the Philippines, especially during the Spanish regime in the Philippines. And even immediately after the exit of the Spaniards in 1898, Mindanao and Sulu remain an area that is not beyond the control of the Manila government.
These territories, also known as the Moro region, were historically populated by indigenous majority Muslim population. The religion was brought here around the 13th century by Arab traders and missionaries. This put them at odds with the Filipino majority, which converted to Catholicism under Spanish rule. The Moro populations would be oppressed.
That was the commission of so many excesses, killings, massacres, massive displacement of peoples in Mindanao, especially the Moro people.
The years of President Ferdinand Marcos Sr.'s rule would be particularly difficult. Christian groups settled in Moro, displacing locals. Then, a major flashpoint occurred in the Jabida massacre of 1968.
There were scores of Moros killed in Corregidor Island, who were part of a special training project of then Marcos government, intended really to form a special Moro group aimed at the invasion of Sabah.
Purportedly, between 11 to 64 Moro recruits were executed by their superiors after complaining of unfair treatment. Another theory said they were killed for refusing to fight fellow Muslims. At the time, the government denied the incident.
And then in the once Empire province of Cotabato and Lanao del Norte and in Zamboanga Peninsula, where there were so massacres, and hundreds to thousands of Moros were killed by the so-called Ilaga organization composed of politicians, Christian politicians in Mindanao, aimed at dislodging the leadership of the Moros. All these factors cumulated into one trajectory, and that was the formation of the Moro National Liberation Front.
The Moro National Liberation Front, or MNLF, was birthed in 1972 from other separatist movements. For decades, MNLF rebel forces and the Philippine government fought a conflict that could have killed as many as 150,000. Mohaga Iqbal joined the movement as a young man. But by 1977, he would find himself on one side of a widening divide within the MNLF.
Basically, it was caused by ideological differences. The MNLF is more political, while the MILF is more Islamic.
A group would splinter in 1977 and officially become the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or the MILF. Mohaga Iqbal found himself the leader of this smaller faction. But the MILF strengths would grow. By the time both sides were ready to sue for peace, the MILF had become the main power brokers in Moro.
Both sides have really come to a point that it's better to negotiate, it's better to sign an agreement and find a political settlement rather than to prolong the war, wherein the government cannot defeat the MILF in a guerrilla warfare, neither the MILF can defeat the national government in conventional warfare. So there was an stalemate in a sense. We started our negotiations with the government in 1997.
Miriam Coronel Ferrer was the chief negotiator for the Philippines government during the final stages of the peace process.
The negotiations itself took 17 years under 5 presidents before it was finally signed. It was tough, of course. I mean, no negotiation was easy. Everything was difficult. Every little piece that you had to put in place.
On March 27, 2014, the Philippines finalized a landmark agreement known as the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro, or the CAB.
So many people have suffered for so long. So many of our stakeholders have worked so hard to arrive at this point.
A crucial demand of the government was the decommissioning of the MILF's armed wing, the Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces, or BIAF. 40,000 combatants would be disbanded, and 7,000 firearms were to be surrendered or destroyed. In exchange, the government would offer socio-economic assistance.
So it's not always easy to convince armed groups to give up their weapons. It's about giving it up and really transforming into civilians, from an identity as fighter or combatant to a new identity as a productive member of society, fully integrated into the social and political processes of the community and of the whole country.
The MILF eventually accepted the terms and agreed to decommission the BIAF.
Finally, On March 27, 2014, we signed the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro. This 2024 is the 10th anniversary of the signing of the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro, and we are going to celebrate that.
The agreement would work towards self-governance for what's called the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, also known as BAM or Bangsamoro. The roughly 13,000 square kilometer 5-province Muslim region has a population of about 4 million. Bangsam is an old Malay word meaning race or nation. At the heart of the agreement is the Bangsamoro Organic Law. This established a transition government with members appointed by the federal government and the MILF.
From transportation, communication, to environment, of course, finance, taxes, and everything. This all had to be put in place in a text.
The Bangsamoro Organic Law provides that the government to be formed has to be led by the MILF. That's why the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao is being led by the MILF.
But peace is fragile. Incidences like the Basilan clash on November 2022 threatened to derail the process. As the chairman of the Peace Implementing Panel of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, Mahanga Iqbal was tasked with investigating the skirmish.
The area was populated by MILF members and supporters, but incidentally, members of the Abu Sayyaf were passing by the area. And then government forces tried to pursue the Abu Sayyaf.
The MILF were asked to vacate the area to facilitate military operations.
Pag-ubos del Leo, niyan si bakuitan ni kami, niyan magano ni sab kami magkilabang balik ni kami. Nagay makajari sampay palabay dam bulan, gepe kami tapili. Pagpente pagpaasek sibilyanin te, pag-asek de ga niya ni talebi bayuan ni luma din. May sibilyanin. Na kami niyan ano na din pangatian kamihin. Sundalo ni mangeddohin pagigana aro sibilyan nila sundalo ni malai si dimulitanin sa inyan.
A series of miscommunication led to the exchange of fire. The husbands of Salah Hujaman and Nursima Sulaiman were killed in the fighting.
Mahirap para sa amin. Siyempre, nawala yung asawa mo.
Wala nang bigay ng mga ma'am, ng mga pagkain sa mga anak namin.
Kapag naulit yon, siyempre matatakot din kami kasi may gera na naman magaganap.
It's an isolated incident and we managed to settle the issue, and I think until now there was no repeat of that incident.
Nonetheless, what the Basilan episode showed was that suspicion still existed between some elements of the MILF and the government. And there could be more threats to this fragile peace. As part of the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro, an interim local government, also known as the Bangsamoro Transitional Government, was formed in 2019. It will lead until 2025, when a new permanent government will be elected.
For these past several years, the farm government has passed a number of codes: administrative code, education code, taxation code, local government code, and few others. So these are all attempts to develop the autonomous region, because in the past, these areas had been addressed quite very inadequately.
To provide security, The 2014 agreement also created the Joint Peace Security Task Force.
Kasi wala pong sa ibang tropa, wala po yan. Kami lang po ay may isa ng ganito. At saka ito po yung kalo namin po. Automatic kapag nakita nila na ito, yung GPST na yun.
This peacekeeping force is unique. It is made up of the MILF forces, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and the Philippine National Police.
Alam natin yung PNP at saka AFP, hindi basta-basta pumasok sa mga area ng MILF, yung control ng area ng MILF. At parang mainit-init pa dyan, yung ilagyan natin ng GPST. At saka yung pwede ng GPS na pumunta doon.
Namin din ng MILF, napag-isipan nila yan pinagbuo ng para po maipakita natin sa mga kasama natin at sa mga mamamayan na hindi na po nag-away yung gobyerno at saka MILF para po makita ng mamamayan na normal na po ang situation natin para po sa normalization.
The force has over 20 stations across the BAM and over 6,000 personnel. Before the Bangsamoro Agreement and the arrival of the JPST, the Basilan province was a hotbed of violence and terrorism.
Sa ngayon na maganda na po yung lugar namin kasi may commander kami na mag-suporta sa amin, pati yung mga housing magbigay sa amin.
Alhamdulillah, magsukur at salamat po sa BARM na nadarating na BARM po. Kami po, yung noon po, kami po ay kawawa. Pero ngayon po, alhamdulillah, peaceful na po na ang...
Politically, there is relative stability in the BARM because there is coordination and cooperation between the rebel forces, particularly the MILF, at the helm with that of the Philippine Security Forces.
But elsewhere, former MILF rebels are less willing to cooperate with the authorities. As part of the Bangsamoro Agreement, the MILF is supposed to decommission its 40,000-strong armed wing, the Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces, or the BIAF. But 10 years on, and the decommissioning process has met with some resistance.
Opo, ito yung mga hindi pa na-decom, yung tsaka hindi naman na dumating lahat. Medyo ito yung mga kumbaga mga close security ko lang po dito, araw-araw na ito ang naka-duty dito sa amin.
According to Deputy Commander Rajan, there are more than 100 men under his command in this base alone who have not yet been decommissioned.
For example, mga M16, meron pa po yan.
They are still holding onto standard issue machine guns.
Ang natin, ang nakita ko po dito, kasi ang process po ng decommissioning, by batches po yan. Tapos may bilangan po per base, tapos yung hindi pa doon kasali sa bilangan ng yung ibigay slot para dito sa amin. Opo, hinintay namin pa po yung kung sakaling meron na slot na galing ng leadership ng MILF, okay, we are ready po sa pag-decommission.
To date, only 26,000 of the planned 40,000 combatants have stood down. MILF fighters are incentivized to decommission through the promise of monetary compensation.
Yun ang gantimpala para bumalik sa civilian life, as amount of 1 million. Kumbaga nainip na rin sa paghintay. Baka natin yung mga iba po, kung hindi maglabas yung mga promises ng government, yung sa mga na-decom, hindi rin basta-basta nag-decom yung mga hindi pa na-decom.
There are already some signs on the ground of people becoming restless and unhappy because they are not receiving what they are supposedly receive.
Jerry Jamjali was offered a slot to decommission in 2022.
Wala na akong armas. Ang sabi nila, dahil ang gobyerno ay maging mabuti na sa amin, doon kami papayag. Dahil may agreement kami, pati gobyerno may...
For many like Jerry, the promised government assistance will be welcomed. The BAM has the highest incidence of poverty in the Philippines.
2022, natanggap namin yung assistance galing binigay ng gobyerno sa amin na 100,000. Hintayin mo ba yung dagdag na? Ang hinihintay lang namin, yung isa na doon yung pabahay, scholarship, tapos yung cash assistance galing sa gobyerno bilang puhunan namin.
These unfulfilled promises of compensation have become a sticking point. But could this all be a misunderstanding? According to the government, the 1 million peso payout was never meant to come in a lump sum of cash. Under-Secretary David Diciano heads the office that implements the comprehensive peace process.
So the 1 million issue is not a 1 million peso in cash. Okay, the issue here is how to address the needs of the combatants. So initially they are being they are given a 100,000 peso cash immediately after being decommissioned. We explained to them that the program of the national government will not be one-time solution to be given right away to the combatant. Rather, it's a multi-year program for all the decommissioned combatants. We have the social services, the ALS or the study grant, educational capacity of the combatants will be addressed, the livelihood program, and even the infrastructure program.
Yet, apart from the commanders of the armed wing of the BIAF and their families, few of the others have received education scholarships. This all adds to the grumbling among MILF fighters.
Kumbaga nainip na rin sa paghintay. Baka ang natin yung mga iba po, sabi niya, yung hindi pa na-decom, hanggang ngayon po, yun lang kuha nila. Hanggang ngayon yung mga sinasabing mga idaan sa mga housing project, sa mga livelihood, wala po, wala. Kahit po yung mga wala talaga. Kaya minsan na ano rin sila.
But in a region that has been plagued by decades of violence, determining land rights has been a major obstacle for the government.
All the 26,130 are all accounted. We have also the indigenous peoples living in there, claiming that they are the first owner of this land. When they want to reclaim their piece of land, and some of these lands are now being occupied by armed elements, not to mention some lawless elements in the area. So there's a lot of violence are being addressed slowly.
For now, MILF leaders like Dan Aznawi, who is also part of the interim government in Bangsamoro, remain committed to the process.
Pero maghintay muna tayo. At saka sabi ko, hindi yan ano natin kasi malaking pera yan. At saka hindi lang sa isang tao. Buong probinsya yan, buong Bangsamoro. Lahat sabi ko yan ang problema natin. Yung ano ko, sana ang gobyerno, ano talaga sa amin, may kumpiyansa o may tiwala sa amin sa MILF. Kasi andyan na rin ang mga decommission natin.
While implementation slowly moves forward, outside forces could threaten to derail the peace process. It took multiple Filipino presidents to push for peace in Bangsamoro.
President Arroyo. She waged war in the earlier part of her term, but at the same time also came up with peace agreements. Then it was through President Aquino when some kind of a peace process continued. It would take President Duterte in his early period of his term when that Bangsamoro Basic Law was transformed into an organic law.
The Basic Law was the draft legislature that outlined the establishment of the autonomous region. It became an organic law when it was ratified by Congress and signed by President Duterte in 2018. The final leg of the transition to self-governance will be completed by President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who was sworn in as president in June 2022. The United Bangsamoro Justice Party, the political party of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, had preferred Marcos Jr.'s rival.
It's an open secret, and the United Bangsamoro Justice Party. We supported Leno Robredo. One reason for that is that the several candidates for president, only Robredo came and visited Darapanan and talked to the leadership of the MILF.
Then there was also the historical baggage of the Marcos name. President Ferdinand Marcos Sr., the current president's father, was associated with several massacres of Moro people during his regime.
So to be very frank, the actuation of the father really affected the decision of the MILF and the United Bangsamoro Justice Party. But moving forward, that's part of history. It can be lessons for the government, for the president, for our people, and it will not hamper, especially the MILF, the Bangsamoro people, to move forward.
For his part, President Marcos Jr. has kept the momentum going. He retained key personnel in the interim Bangsamoro transitional government, ensuring continuity.
By not taking the whole situation negatively, he acted like a statesman in terms of still working quite progressively with the MILF, even supporting many of the programs of the BARM and maintaining the status quo.
But the Bangsamoro region is a complex one. Outside the MILF, powerful clans hold a lot of sway in the region. Some families trace their lineage to royalty.
We know that there are significant established political clans who have governed the localities for the longest time.
These clans saw in the election of President Marcos Jr. a chance to lobby for more power in the Bangsamoro government.
And all of these traditional politicians, governors and mayors, would want to vie for positions in the BARM. Either they themselves, their families and relatives, their supporters as members of parliament, and so on and so forth. That was so crucial, the pressure from politicians. The MILF could have been dislodged, yet President Marcos continued to support the MILF.
But in 1 year, things could change. The transitional government will step down. The people will have to elect a new permanent government.
Every time there are elections or rivalries related to elections, families or parties would engage in violence to the extent of killing their opponents. So if there are problems, say, during election or say in their business, instead of going to the court, so they would fight against themselves. They would shoot each other and so on and so forth.
These clan feuds are known as Rido. Rido result in massive collateral damage in the form of civilian deaths and mass displacements from the areas where hits and attacks are carried out.
We cannot prevent some armed conflicts between and among these groups. Most, if not all, of the reasons why they are fighting against each other are personal or family problems. So we cannot prevent that.
So that would mean the BARM that supposedly promises stability and development in the area would still be put into questions because of the presence of these traditional forces. You know, maybe instigated to create new rounds of threats and problems in the future.
That's also precisely what we wanted to strengthen in the Bangsamoro, that there are effective justice mechanisms where differences can be resolved, whether family feuds or even electoral contests, election-related conflicts. We need the national leadership to be able to manage the behavior, the unruly behavior of the political class in these localities.
The clan feuds are not the only thing that threatens peace in Bangsamoro. While the MILF may have gone mainstream, other militant groups are still active in the region. In 2017, fighters from the Mote and Abu Sayyaf groups with links to the Islamic State besieged Moro, a city within Bangsamoro. What followed was a 5-month-long battle between the insurgents and government forces.
You have the radical groups who are, as you mentioned, in the fringe, creating extremism in many instances. So they are all, in a sense, actors in the BARM come 2025.
Malaking challenges yun sa amin. Kaya dito sa siguro hindi lang dito sa Basilan, kundi sa buong Bangsamoro, iwasan namin na talaga. Kung may kung may narinig namin na diyan na mga lawless small group, tuloy namin na sila, hinahabol para mawala, para ma-scattered na sila, para mawala na sila.
More recently, last December, an explosion during Catholic Mass at a university gymnasium killed at least 4 people and injured dozens in the city of Marawi. The Islamic State later claimed responsibility. MILF members, disgruntled with the dawdling peace process, may defect to these radical groups.
There are still remnants of radical groups. You know, after the Marawi siege in 2017, and it appears that these groups have mutated into different subgroups and personalities. I think it was their plan to create an impact on the Christians particularly, so they did the thing.
That in the case of the BARM government, we do not have the police power. Only the government has that police power. So what we can do, probably, in terms of maintaining peace and order, is really to engage in dialogues with all these armed groups. For instance, the Abu Sayyaf, the BIFF. Maybe to a certain extent through community leaders, we can try to reach out to them.
But currently, the central government could be distracted by external events. Escalating tensions with China in the South China Sea have occupied President Marcos's attention and resources in the last few months. The government recently announced plans to spend some $35 billion on upgrading its military in the next decade.
The government has continued to procure max firearms and ammunition this past several years. So why procure max firearms, right? When you can use the budget for this to support, socio-economic development program in the countryside. So we just hope that this contradiction would not worsen in the coming years, and that it would not affect the peace gain in Mindanao in that part of the Bangsamoro areas.
The current president shouldn't be comfortable that there's no fighting between the government and the MILF, because I think, and it's not enough, right? Because even if there's no fighting, but if the real reforms are not being implemented, eventually things will not be very stable. And then that affects your ability to be able to address all the other issues.
So, what lies ahead for the Bangsamoro come 2025? And what of the MILF? Are they truly ready to transition into a civilian organization?
We're reaching a crucial point in 2025 when all hell can just break loose precisely because of elections.
It has been 10 years since the comprehensive agreement on Bangsamoro was signed between the Philippines government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, bringing a semblance of peace to the region. But a decade is not enough to wipe away the scars of violence. Since 2014, Save the Children of Mindanao, an NGO working to improve the lives of children, have come to the strongholds of rebel groups. They want to help erase the trauma of decades of violence.
May mga pangyayari noon na may putukan kahit marinig, although hindi nila nakikita, naririnig nila yung putukan. Mayroon siyang impact sa mga bata na makakaranas sila ng hindi magandang experience. Sasabi ng mga psychologists, tawag nila itong post-traumatic stress disorder. Ang ginagawa lang ngayon ay dinodraw nila yung noong naalala nila noon at ano yung nakikita nila ngayon sa kanilang lugar sa Bakisong or sa Albarca Asahol, yung kasalukuyan.
May ilaw na siya.
So sa ganitong paraan, sabi ng mga psychologists ay naiibsan yung kanilang experience na hindi maganda. So unti-unti silang papapalitan ng positibo na karanasan. Isa na dito yung pinaparana sa kanila yung mga laruan na hindi pa nila nahawakan since nakailang pagkasilang. Yung mga laruan na wala siyang bahid ng violence tulad ng bisikleta, mga laruang toy cars, yan, mga dolls, Barbie, yung teddy bear. So minsan itong mga batang to, minsan nahumaling sila sa baril-barilan na nakikita namin na para bang nagsasimulate na sila ng kung ano nakikita nila sa mga matatanda, ginagaya nila. As in, hinulma talaga siya, parang maliit na replika ng totoong baril. Kung saan hawak-hawak nila. Minsan, magsisimulate sila ng ambush, ng parang encounter.
In the same way, while the MILF wants to look to the future, it can be difficult to let go of their past. Their days of glory as freedom fighters of the people of Moro.
It's just rational, I think, that the MILF would be a little bit hesitant to fully mainstream itself and change totally its traditional course. When decommissioning remains unfinished, come 2025, the MILF would have reason to say that we could not sign the exit agreement because the decommissioning is still unfinished. So that would mean the MILF would still have certain legitimacy to continue play its role as a revolutionary group precisely because of the arms, the remaining firearms that it holds. With the arms intact, there remains to be forces to be reckoned with.
Next year, when the transitional government is to be replaced by an elected parliament. The people of Bangsamoro will get to decide if they still want the MILF in charge.
We're reaching a crucial point in 2025 when all hell can just break loose precisely because of elections.
The MILF would have to engage against traditional politicians in a democratic process where their future is quite uncertain. There is that mix of impressions. There's some kind of a development on one hand, but there's also lots of things to be done in many areas in Mindanao, and particularly the Bangsamoro areas.
Still, the leaders of MILF say they remain committed to the cause.
Since we have signed an agreement which includes decommissioning, then we have to undertake that, because we cannot and we will not pursue our right to self-determination through the use of force or weapons. It's through electoral struggle, meaning through elections. We'll be in government if we win election.
May umaangat din ng konti. Hindi naman gaano mabilis. Kasi kung mabilis masyado, lahat millionaire na. So at least umangat ng konti sapagkat merong oras na they can tell their land. Unlike before, they are very fearful. The dividend of peace is we are equally benefited by the dividend of the peace.
With the clock ticking, bums remain on the road to the full implementation of the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro. On one hand, unfulfilled promises of development. On the other, unfinished agreement to disarm.
Yung mga kasamahan namin, sabi nila, parang alanganin na sila sa ngayon. Hanggat hindi pa darating yung assistant galing gobyerno, lahat ng promise sa amin, parang alanganin sila. Ayaw na nila munang magbaba. Pero yung kami nagkapagbaba ng armas, wala na kaming magawa.
So it's not enough to be just say everything is going smoothly, because there are a lot of things that needed attention. And there's need to fast track the socio-economic components, the weapons component, and also the important messaging. Why it's important to have a really good election that is free from violence, and for the government instrumentalities really to enforce observance of election laws.
And then there is one more thing, putting the central government at odds with Bangsamoro. A conflict almost 10,000 kilometers away, the war in Gaza. President Marcos has said he stands with Israel and has drawn closer to the US. Meanwhile, the Muslim-majority BAM has sided with the Palestinians. President Marcos also recently had a falling out with his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, a popular figure in the region. All these mean that President Marcos's trust rating in Mindanao fell from 70% to 38% in the latest polls. Could these areas of friction derail the peace process?
The election in 2025 will surely happen. And the President is very vocal. Our expectation is that the normalization program will still be continued until the end of the present administration. That he made mention that he will finish all the commitments to the MILF and during his term. So meaning until 2028, when the present administration will be finished.
We have invested so much in the peace process. We lost so much if either of the two parties, not only the government but the MILF, would have a U-turn attitude in relation to the peace process. There is no other option except really to pursue the peace process through to the end.
It has been 10 years since the peace deal between the MILF and the government was signed. 1 year from now, Bangsamoro will take a big step towards self-governance. The stability that comes with it could be the springboard for development.
naramdaman namin yung unti-unting pagbabago. Parang nakita na ko personally na papunta na tayo doon sa total na yung pinapangarap ng Basilan na katahimikan. Sa ngayon, kreditin natin sa kanila, sa gobyerno ng BARM. Unti-unting may pumapasok na ng mga turismo. Para sa akin kasi yung turismo yung unang indicator ng progress. Kasi parang siya yung foundation ng progress.
We have covered a lot of grounds already. We have so many success stories. And the credit should be given to the government, to the MILF, to the Filipino people in general, including our people here and the international community. The end of all this undertaking have to have peace with justice in Mindanao so that there would be progress, there would be development for all.
As for former militants, it is finally a chance to put decades of violence behind them and perhaps create a brighter future for the children of Moro.
Dahil ako, 7 ang naging anak, puro mga babae silang lahat. Yung nakaraang taon, may isa kong anak, graduate sa statistic. Ngayon, may pinapaaral naman ako. Civil service passer na yung aking anak. Kahit may pagtatampo, na habaan talaga natin ang kwa. Wala tayong magkukuha yung isang gulo na yan. Wala.